Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to discuss operating expenses or OPEX and the things that we should consider when building those into our financial model. Now this video is part of a series of videos that explains how financial models work. And if you haven't seen the previous videos in the series, click on the link popping up on the top right hand corner of your screen. Also, if you want access to our fully customizable financial model that will have all the things we're going to discuss today already built in and all the things we've discussed in the past as well, click on the link in the description below. So let's get into it. So what are operating expenses, or what is OPEX? So operating expenses are those administrative costs that you have to incur for you to run your business. So for example, this could be rent for your office or your internet expenses. Now the key difference between your operating expenses and your direct costs is that your operating expenses are more general and administrative, while your direct expenses are usually tied to whatever you're selling. We've done a video on direct costs before. If you haven't seen that, click on the link popping up right now. So what are the important things to consider when we are building in our operating expenses into our financial model? So the first thing is the split between our fixed costs and our variable costs. Fixed costs are those costs that you have to incur regardless of your output. You have to pay those costs regardless of whether you sell 1 million items or you sell 0 items. So for example, this could be your office rent. Whether or not you make any sale, you will have to pay that rent. Or if you make a lot of sales, you will still have to pay the same amount of rent. So that's a fixed cost. Then we have our variable costs, which are dependent on the output or on the usage. So a good example of this would be something like our software expenses. So for software subscriptions, typically the more users you have, the higher the amount you have to pay. So that's a variable cost. Now, why is it important for us to distinguish between fixed costs and variable costs? The reason here is that it's tied to our profitability. When you have a lot of fixed costs, we would say you have high operating leverage. And what that means is that for you to break even and make a profit, you will have to make a lot of sales so that you can cover the high fixed costs. As compared to a business which has more variable costs and lower fixed costs, that business will only have to make a lower amount of sales to cover the fixed costs, because the fixed costs are much lower and the variable costs are higher. The incentive here, simplistically, is to keep your fixed costs as low as possible. Although once again, that depends on the industry that you're operating and your type of business. It's not always possible to keep fixed costs low, but ideally you want to keep the fixed costs as low as possible. So splitting between the fixed costs and the variable costs helps you in that cost control. The second thing we need to think about when we are building operating expenses into our financial models is the different categories and subcategories of our expenses. So rather than model our expenses as one big block, what we should do is have different categories, and then under those categories we'll have other subcategories. So for example, a major category would be something like marketing. So marketing will be an overall cost, and under marketing we can have various other sub costs. So for example, we could have our billboards, we could have our social media advertisement, we could have our radio and TV advertising. So rather than just have marketing as one big expense, you want to break it down into the different costs. And the reason for this is that it helps you see where the cash is actually going, and it helps you control those costs better because you're able to measure them. Otherwise, if you just have a big marketing cost bucket, you will not be able to effectively control that cost. Then the third thing we need to think about is inflation. Now, generally, costs are always going up year after year due to inflation. So it is unrealistic for you to assume that your cost will remain the same throughout time. So what you want to do is build in an automated inflationary adjustment to your costs so that you know that at the end of every year that you're modeling, the cost will go up by a certain inflationary factor depending on the inflation in the markets that you're operating in. This helps your forecast to stay realistic because your costs will not remain flat, they're gonna go up at some point. And the final thing that we need to think about when we're modeling our operating expenses is our cash flow. Now, most businesses fail because they run out of cash. And one way to stop your business from running out of cash is by making sure you have accurate forecast of the cash that is coming in and the cash that is going out. So tying this back to your operating expenses, you want to model your expenses in a way that shows when the cash actually goes out rather than when the expense is actually incurred. So this is what we call a cash basis of accounting as opposed to an accruals basis of accounting. So for example, you have something like your rent. If you pay your rent quarterly in advance, that means you pay rent for 3 months at the start of each quarter. When you're building this into your financial model, you need to show that 3-month expense of cash going out at the start of the quarter, as opposed to showing your rent expense going monthly, because you actually pay the cash at the start of the quarter, you don't pay it monthly. So you show this big hit at the start of the quarter. Same thing would apply to something like your software expenses. Typically for software subscriptions, because it's cheaper, you might pay the subscription at the start of the year for a full year. So you want to show that cash payment going out for the entire year at the start of the year, rather than spreading that expense over several months. So that way you're able to capture the correct cash implication of your operating expenses. So those are the major things that we need to think about when it comes to expenses. If you have any other ideas that we may have missed out, please feel free to comment below. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. Please share this video with your friends who might find it useful, and I will see you in the next one.